Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives. Not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, here we go. You dialed it correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line, 605-477-3249. Live in Australia, Guineith Isaacs. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
Pretty frosted, which is the way I am most days. How are you?
I'm still waking up a little bit. So
okay. Well, you've got a couple more hours to get that accomplished.
No, I'll be fine now.
Guineith, let me share a quick story. Let me share a quick story with you. So, there's this store, you've heard me mention the Menards syndrome. That's where a race car wannabe or a race car driver, whichever it may be, Paul Menard, son of the founder of Menards, it's a big box store here in the United States.
Yep.
I'm not a fan of, well, you've heard me call it the Menard syndrome. That's where I want it. I deserve it. I deserve to win. I can push anybody out of my way. I don't care how many cars I crash into or cause to burn and whatever.
That's right.
That's the Menard syndrome, brought to us by Paul Menard, the young son of the founder of Menards. Well, I don't like Menards, but I have decided that since corporations are not loyal to me, they keep raising the prices, making the terms and conditions worse for me, and so forth. I'm going to spend my money where it does me the most good, even if it means going to Menards. So I decided that they had the best price on salt for our farm. They had the best price on natural dog food for our dogs for the farm. So, and they had an 11% off if they have these 11% off sales every once in a while. So I decided to maximize my savings by getting the dog food and the salt at the lowest price, plus getting an additional 11% off. So that's the way I do it. And so what I decided to do last night was to get an additional couple of cards, meaning credit card authorized users on my account. So I called the credit card company number on the back of the Menards issued credit card, which was issued by a company called Capital One. And Capital One said, just for security purposes, we just have a couple more questions before we can send those cards out to you. So I picked some aliases and, I made up some names for these other cards, and that was okay with them, but I didn't share that with them, that these are just fictitious names. And they said, just a couple more questions. So what was the color of your 635 BMW? And I paused for a long time thinking about how do I want to answer this. I said I never had one, and I never did. So I don't know if it was a trick question or what, but they wanted to know what color my BMW was that I've never owned, nor driven.
Wow.
I've never been in a 6 Series BMW. Now, I don't know if what they do is have an algorithm that pops these questions up for the agents on the telephone to ask when they talk to customers. Maybe it's, let's look at the credit score. Credit score, if there's a decent credit score, it'll drive questions toward BMW, Mercedes, things like that. I don't know. But maybe that's what it is. But I've never had one. And then the next question that they asked, which was very surprising to me as well, is what is the height? Pick one of the following heights that your driver's license would say you are, or tell us what your height is on your driver's license. Now, how did they get that information? How did Capital One, a credit card bank issuer, get information about what's on my driver's license? How did they get that? Obviously, there's collusion between the state.
They paid for it.
Yes, I'm sure they did. But there's collusion between the state corporation and the bank corporation. Because you would think that hair color, that's on my driver's license, height, there's even a picture of me with my eyes closed, is on my license. In order to get one, you have to give them that information. Well, that information I gave back in maybe the late 60s when I got my first driver's license on the East Coast. And back then it was a piece of heavy stock paper, and it had my eye color and my hair color and my height and weight, but no picture. They've improved it with pictures. And I'm thinking about what I'm going to do when I'm asked for my next picture for my license. Am I going to put a big bandage on my face as if I've been dragged by the back of a motorcycle in a motorcycle accident? Am I going to do that? Am I going to grow facial hair, maybe a beard and a mustache? Am I going to wear an eye patch? I mean, what am I going to do? Am I going to wear sunglasses and say, no, I can't take these off because I need them? I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But they're not getting images of my eyes. I'm going to stand there with my eyes closed. That's for sure. But what I'm trying to say is we have no real understanding of how much information is out about us and where it is. We don't know. But it's too much. Way too much. So I just want to share that with the class. Any thoughts, comments, suggestions, concerns, or outrage, Guineith?
Well, I think that you're right to be upset. I think that Menards is getting that information off the government about the driver's license and that sort of thing. The government sells it to anyone who will buy it because the government's a corporation and they need to make money too. And so they sell their data, and they certainly do so here, which is completely wrong and unconscionable. But they've been caught doing it over and over and over again. That they'll even, if you've got an outstanding so-called infringement notice, they'll sell that debt, and they won't just sell it once. They'll sell it to over and over and over again to one debt collector after another.
They'll sell, the government corporations will sell your property, your home, your house, your land on the courthouse steps if you don't pay them rent in the form of taxes.
Well, it's like this. My friend Wayne Glue, he was, disputing their property taxes, and they fraudulently transferred his title out from under him. And it's fraud. And he's suing them. He's taking them to the House of Lords in London, and he'll win eventually, and he'll get his property back eventually. But in the meantime, they have broken into his farmhouse that he had on his farm. It was like something like a shed, actually, but it was livable. And they have that in Geraldton in Western Australia. They have these things called livable sheds where you've got a shed and they have a toilet, they have, kitchen facilities, and they have like a lounge room, and you can lock it, and so you go there and you can cook and you can have a shower, you can go to the bathroom, you can do all these things. But yeah, and they caved in the top of his septic tank. And I said, that is just disgusting. What they're doing is they're deliberately making the property unlivable by doing that. And they fraudulently transferred the title out of his name because there was, the title was still under dispute. But what that is that's called a break in the chain of title, okay? And when there's a break in the chain of title, you get two conflicting owners emerge, both claiming title over the one piece of land. And when that happens, the courts have to decide that the earlier chain of title takes precedence. Okay, so that's the first person who claimed ownership rather than the second person who claimed ownership, because the second person was obviously as a result of fraud somehow or other, So whoever buys that property, I think it's, you'd have to go to, I think it's 293 Chapman Road in Geraldton, but you would have to go to Wayne Glue's Facebook page to see exactly the whole story of it. But they do this. It's disgusting.
Well, I'll tell you what they did to me. Tell you what they did to me. So I've been on the radio for about 8 years now, and I've been challenging some of the things that the government corporations do, state, county, and even federal. And I said some things about people in the state, gave out some phone numbers of some of the alleged representatives, and I don't think they like that. Next thing that happened is my wallet was stolen out of my truck, so I no longer carry a wallet with me, and I had to get a replacement driver's license. So I went to get it. I went to the gal who I've seen for years and years and years, and she said, "Vincent, I can't give it to you because your driver's license has been suspended." I said, "Ridiculous! What? Come on. Yeah, your driver's license has been suspended. You'll have to resolve that with the state before I can issue a replacement." Well, I was livid. She said, yeah, there's some kind of a fine you didn't pay. I'll tell you what that was all about when we come back. Class, this is what they do. And when I tell you how they do it,
that's absolutely what they do.
You're not going to believe what they do to enlist the support of unknowing people in the blue team. So we're talking about how the alleged representatives of the state government corporations put the squeeze on people. And here's what happened to me. So I could not get my driver's license replaced because there was an infraction on my record. And what somebody did was they put a small fine of $20 on my license. And I was never notified of this. So I didn't pay it because I didn't know it existed. And after some amount of time, let's say 30, 60, 90 days, I don't know the exact amount of time of this algorithm that they use, but after an amount of time, if your infraction is unpaid, your driver's license becomes suspended. Then as you're motoring around, the blue team may pick you up. Maybe a taillight, maybe whatever you do, they may pick you up. And when they run your driver's license, they find that you've been driving with a suspended license. Then the next thing that happens is real fun. You are subject to arrest. Now, what actually happened? I blew a gasket when I learned this. There was no infraction. So sorry, Mr. Finelli. Most so sorry. It looks like it was a clerk typographical error. Typo. They always blame it on the clerks.
Yeah.
I believe it was a deliberate attempt to harass me by the state government corporation, somebody within there. And it's insidious. These people are just awful to deal with. So because of the power of the state, they can do things to the little people like me. they can place a fine, a small fine. Let's say, I don't know what it was, probably some parking fine. Maybe I parked on the sidewalk, or maybe I parked in front of one of those planters at a police station. I mean, whatever it was all made up. It never happened. As a matter of fact, I have a perfect driving record so far. No dings, no dents, no accidents, no collisions, ever. Since the late 1960s. So I don't do stupid things. Well, I don't do stupid things. I really don't. And anyway, I wanted to share with our class, that's the kind of stuff that these guys pull. And talking about vehicles, I wanted to share this. In our shop right now, we have a 2003 Chevy Trailblazer. It's an SUV. What a piece of junk. What a piece of junk. This thing, I think they said, okay, design team number 1, we don't need you. Design team number 2, we don't need you. Second backup design team, we don't need you either. We're going to have the the guys who don't know how to design build this car. Well,
oh dear.
It's in for a radiator leak. Well, what General Motors and other corporations have done, as well as the European makers, they've switched from copper radiators to aluminum radiator cores with plastic end caps and gaskets, rubber gaskets.
You're kidding me.
Nope, I'm not kidding. And they leak. Well,
I was going to say, isn't that going to be a problem?
Absolutely.
Isn't that going to corrode?
Well, it's a real problem because you have to have a different kind of antifreeze for aluminum that you used to have for copper. So now we have an aluminum radiator, and we have a cast iron engine block most of the time. Sometimes there's an aluminum engine block, like in some of the Porsches, but it's an aluminum radiator core with a cast iron engine. So you have two different metals, and you have to have an antifreeze that will not generate electricity.
Up the sacrificial anode situation.
That is exactly right, because you have two different metals, and the antifreeze solution has to be neutral in pH so that it does not corrode either the engine block nor the radiator. Well, I looked at this thing in the shop.
But even if it's just slightly acidic, that's going to do damage.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely. It will eat the radiator. Tell you a little bit more about the cost of this. When we come back, you're going to be stunned. So, class, during the break, I went out into the shop and I took another look at this 2003 Chevrolet Trailblazer SUV with a leaking radiator. And it's a part in our shop. And I got to tell you, it's a real piece of junk that Chevrolet managed to fleece the unsuspecting customers that they gathered to buy these vehicles. But here's why I say that. In order to replace the radiator, which is substandard to begin with, you have to drain the antifreeze, the coolant. You have to take off the front grille and both headlights. I'm not kidding. And then you can access the radiator. You've got to disconnect wires and cables, and then you have to move hoses out of the way. And then once you get all that done, you can get to the radiator and replace it. But I was looking at this, and I was thinking, well, it also, at this time, it needs a belt tensioner to tension the serpentine belt. Now, that's another, to put a new belt on, I just looked up the cost. It's about $300 to replace the belt tensioner and the serpentine belt on this particular model car. That's $300 more. In addition to the $506 to $577 that it costs to replace the radiator. It's between a 5 and a 6 hour job to replace the radiator. Total cost to replace those parts, $877. Now, that doesn't buy you a new car. That just buys you a replacement radiator, a serpentine belt, and a belt tensioner with labor. $877. So while I was looking at it during the break that we just had, I thought, what would it take to replace the alternator? Well, these engineers figured out that they could tuck the alternator in such a difficult place to get to. You have to do the same thing. You have to take the radiator out and the headlights and the grill to get to the alternator, which used to be on top of the engine. Very easy to replace. Not anymore. Yeah. Now it costs between $539 and $721 to replace an alternator. This is crazy. Yeah. Now, if you contrast that, yes?
Hiluxes have the same problem. Toyota Hiluxes. Mm-hmm. They're a fantastic vehicle. They will keep driving, especially the older ones. They'll keep driving and driving and driving and driving, and the people from Top Gear tried to destroy one and failed, but the alternator is underneath the engine block. Mm-hmm. The most horrible place to possibly put an alternator, and I know this because I used to own a Hilux, and it was going to cost me $1,200 to get a new alternator on a Hilux.
That's Australian the number that
it's disgusting.
That's the number that's in my mind to get a replacement alternator from a rebuilt one from like an AutoZone or one of those big box automobile parts stores, the chain stores, about $105. That's retail. Now, we wouldn't pay that because we buy them wholesale, so we'd pay less. But that's about what it would cost. Unless you have some, oddball limited production vehicle, then it would cost much more. But, for a typical Chevrolet or Ford or Chrysler, you're looking at about $105 rebuilt. And that's with a lifetime warranty. Now, they don't last a lifetime. They last less than the original one lasted. But, if you keep the vehicle for a while, you just keep getting free replacements until they're sick of you. But what I wanted to say is I have a 1968 AMX, American Motors Corporation car called an AMX. The model was an AMX. Now, I know that it would take me between 1/2 hour and 1 hour to pull the radiator out and replace it with another one. I know that for a fact because I've had my engine out 13 times. I know how long it takes. And a fan belt, we didn't have serpentine belts back in 1968, but a fan belt was like $3, $2.99. So the whole job to pull the radiator out, put a new fan belt on, about $75. Today, you're looking at $877. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So I just wanted to share that.
To make money for them. To basically, so that you have to bend over, as the saying goes. Yeah. It's designed to do you out of something, to molest your pocketbook.
Yeah, he asked me how I was doing, and I'm still wounded from a telephone discussion I had, and I'll tell you what it was. So within the last week, I talked with a family member, and I asked this family member, "Hey, your mom's not thinking about buying a new car, is she?" "Oh, no. Good. I'm just so glad to hear it." Because she has a 19-year-old vehicle. It's an SUV, and it's very good. Very good. She's taking great care of it. Oil changes frequently. And so happened to be talking to the mom. And I said, "So, hey, I just want to check with you. You're not planning to buy a new vehicle?" "I just ordered one." "No, really?" "Oh, yeah, just ordered one." I said, "Can you get out of it?" "I don't want to get out of it. And I could tell that I could tell that this discussion was just going to create hard feelings. So I dropped it right then and there and handed the phone to Mrs. Finelli, and off I went. The reason is, it's always this reason. Well, I don't want to get stranded if I'm on a trip, driving 800 miles. I don't want, my old vehicle to let me down. There is this belief that people have that a new one is not going to let you down. The old ones will let you down.
A new one's more likely to let you down. You're less likely to break down in a 1985 Hilux, for instance, than in a 2019 Hilux, for instance.
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense, Vincent?
Absolutely.
The 1985 Hilux is not going to let you down.
That's exactly.
These guys from Top Gear, they got this Hilux from the 1980s, and they parked it at between the high water mark and the low water mark at Bristol. And they let the tide come in and cover it, and then the tide went out, and they found it. It broken its moorings. Bristol's got some of the strongest tides in the world. It had broken its mooring that they'd made for it and been tossed around in the surf for 6 hours. And yet they got it. They got all the sand out of it. They cleaned it up. They sprayed some WD-40 in the carburetor, and they turned the key, and the blooming thing started. You couldn't dream of doing that with a brand new Hilux. It's just jaw-dropping. They parked it on top of a block of apartments that was going to be demolished. And then they pressed the button and demolished the apartment building and, controlled demolition. And then they fished the Hilux out of the wreckage. This is the same Hilux. And then they, once again, they did some minor repairs, reattached the battery, sprayed some WD-40 into the carburetor, and then turned the key and the thing started. And they drove it. They had to be able to drive it its own length. That was part of the test. They did all sorts of things. They bashed it with a wrecking ball. They, dropped it 100 feet and, and it still started. You couldn't do any of this with a modern car. And that was not a brand new Hilux. This Hilux was an old farm truck that had seen duty on a farm for the last 20 years prior to that. It was not a new vehicle. And yet, I would trust any day a 1985 Hilux over a 2019 Hilux with all its new doodads and buttons. Mm-hmm. No, I wouldn't do it.
And that's the situation we're talking about, because she's buying a brand new model of the same vehicle. It happens to be made by Jeep. Now, the Jeep that was made in 2000 is not the same as the current Jeep, because the new Jeep is owned by Fiat. Now, Fiat has never had a stellar reputation for making a great vehicle. My mom had a Fiat 850 Spider. It was a two-seater, little four-cylinder, 850cc convertible car. It looked beautiful. When it ran, it was nice, but it was unreliable. And it rusted like crazy. It was a piece of junk. So we've had experience with Fiat. Fiat is not known for reliability. And then you take the Chrysler Corporation, which is not known for reliability either. You put them together. Now you have two companies that are not known for quality. And would you buy a new car from them? That'd be crazy. And I'm so upset about this. I can't believe it, because it would cause a war within my extended family if I press this issue any further. But today, vehicles don't come with spare tires. 28% of them don't even have spare tires. So what are you going to do? Class, you buy a new vehicle and you're driving down the road, you hit one of these bumps, and you've got these new low-profile tires, and you damage your wheel because you hit a pothole. So what are you going to do? So you find that you don't have a spare tire, you don't have a jack, you've got nothing that can solve this problem. So you get on your cell phone, because of course you have a cell phone, right? You call somebody, and the guy comes out. Is he going to have a wheel? No. Is he going to have a tire? No. Is he going to have a tire machine? No. They're going to tow your vehicle. Where? To some garage somewhere. And are they going to be able to fix it right then and there? Probably not. Are they going to have a wheel? No. Are they going to have that tire? Probably not. So now what are you going to do? You're going to have to wait till tomorrow to get the wheel and the tire, assuming they can work a miracle and find the wheel. So now you're looking at not only did you not get where you're going, you've got to spend the night someplace because you need a wheel and a tire.
Expense, and it's deliberately designed to be so.
And if it's an all-wheel drive vehicle, you don't need just one tire. If your tire is worn more than 2/32 of an inch, you're going to need a whole set of tires. Now, what's the likelihood that that guy who's going to be fixing your car has all 4 tires? 0. We'll be right back. So just a short detour about new vehicles. So, class, here's what happens. If you have an all-wheel drive vehicle, all the tires must be of the same make, model, and amount of wear. So if they're 3/4 good, meaning 25% worn, great. But you cannot replace one if it's has a difference of 2/32 from the other ones. So what happens is, if you have a tire failure and if you have an all-wheel drive vehicle, the chances of finding a tire that has the same amount of wear as the other 3 that are good on your vehicle is 0. So now you're looking at buying a full set of tires. The other thing that happens is tire manufacturers keep changing the models within their makes. So, for example, if you have model 100 tire, the likelihood of you being able to buy model 100 3 years from now is close to 0. So now you're still going to have to buy 4 new tires. And you're going to have the motel charge on top of that. So what used to be, well, let me just take the spare tire out of my trunk. I'll jack up the car with the jack that came with the vehicle. I will change it myself and be on my way. No. Now you're looking at a motel stay and 4 tires. That's what you're looking at. And let me just share one other thing. George will be right with you. George is on hold. George in New Hampshire. So here's the next thing. So I got a call early in the morning before the broadcast from one of our instructors, and he has a battery from a battery reseller called Batteries Plus. So he has their best battery, 5-year free replacement. Great. Well, the problem is the battery is not producing the amount of reserve current nor voltage that he needs. It's about half of what it was when it was new. Well, imagine this. So let's say you live in a place like Florida or Texas or Arizona or New Mexico or California where it's hot and sunny and it's bumper-to-bumper traffic. So you're in your new vehicle and you've got this Batteries Plus 5-year free replacement battery and you're in bumper-to-bumper traffic. Well, naturally, because it's hot, you've got your air conditioning on and the vehicle, to keep you safe, has the headlights and taillights and side marker lights all lit up, and the auxiliary fan is running because it's so hot and you're in bumper-to-bumper traffic. So you've got the auxiliary fan, the headlights, the taillights, you've got your air conditioning on, and you've got your blower on maximum inside the car. So maximum drain on your battery. That's all fine, except for one thing. Well, what happens with the new alternators and the new vehicles is they don't start charging until you get up to 1,500 RPM. That's to save energy.
Oh, dear.
So now
crazy.
you're draining. Yes, so now you're draining your battery. You're not recharging it because you're stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and the 50 to 120 computers that you have in your vehicle, which are connected via computer bus, are getting confused because they don't have enough voltage to operate. So now your car gets stupid because you're in traffic and the alternator is not charging the battery. It's like, who approved this design? That's where we are today. And that's why I'm so upset about this new vehicle that one of our family members is buying, because I believe that she trusts that jerk at the dealership. I believe that's what this is all about, because he's a nice guy. But he's leading her down into what's, I believe, will be a mess. And I really hope it doesn't happen. I love this lady very much. I just wish she would pull the plug and say, you know what, I'm not going through with this deal. Because what? You lied to me through omission. You didn't tell me that I didn't have a spare tire. You didn't tell me that I would be susceptible to all of these problems. George in New Hampshire, welcome.
Hi,
with Guineith Isaacs.
Hi, Guineith. I have a question about when you were talking about the radiators, if you don't mind. And
Sure.
I have a family member who has a 21-year-old vehicle with about 73,000 miles on it, if it's a Ford Escort. Now, it needed a radiator, and I was surprised to find out that the radiator was made out of PVC plastic with, like you said, the aluminum core. So I looked around and I picked them up. I picked her up a racing radiator, more money, but in other words, it was all aluminum. And I'm wondering, from what you told me about what you add to it and stuff like that, I'm not saying you know maybe off the top of the head, but then again you might. What would be the stuff to put in it? Would it still take the regular green radiator fluid, or would you have to put in some special concoction now because it's all aluminum?
The antifreeze solutions, or the antifreeze that you would buy in the gallon jug, you can buy it 50-50 mix, or you can buy full strength. We always buy full strength, and we add our own water. But there are three types. There's the orange, there is the green, and there's the yellow. So what you have to do, believe it or not, you have to read each jug to find out which one works with your vehicle. And you may not be able to just take the green and pour it in with the yellow, or the orange and pour it in with the yellow or the green. Right. You have to find exactly what was in there. So what we do, what we do is we use an antifreeze tester, which has a bulb that will suck out some of the antifreeze, and then we look at it for the color, because we make sure that if the vehicle already had green in it, we put green in it. But that may not be the right antifreeze either. It's way more complicated than it used to be. Way more complicated. So what you have to do is follow your manufacturer's recommendations, or read the jug and see, if it's for BMW or Mercedes or Ford or Chevy or Chrysler, what they recommend. So off the top of my head, I can't tell you.
No, see, all I meant, because it was a Ford Escort, it was a basic thing. It took the green radiator fluid originally. That's what the book called for. But I didn't know if the aluminum radiator, now that's all aluminum, no PVC, if it would make a difference. That's all I meant. No,
I don't think it would. I think you would stay with the original recommendation. I'll tell you why. Let me change.
I'm not
gears
trying to
a
put
little
you
bit.
on the spot.
No. It's fine. I have an answer. What you need to have is a dielectric between the aluminum radiator and the block of the engine, because they're two different metals. And you do, because that would be the radiator hoses. So even though you have an all aluminum radiator, I don't think you're going to have electrolysis, which would eat the radiator more than it would if you had the plastic PVC. Everyone all set? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Guineith Isaacs with us. And George in New Hampshire, USA Prepares instructors, asked a very good question. And it's about coolant. And this is one of the toughest things that we have to deal with in our farm shop. And so I went out to the shop during the break, and I looked at the antifreeze, and here's the answer. So there's green, yellow, and orange. The orange is typically Dex Cool for General Motors applications. The green, and I'm going to read the jug of green. I've got it in my hands right now. It says, for use in Ford and Chrysler 2000 model year and earlier. So green is Ford and Chrysler 2000 and earlier. Then for General Motors, you can use it as well, 1995 and earlier. And you can also use it in all makes and models, 1989 and earlier. So what we do is we literally look at the antifreeze color that's in there, and we try to stay with that if we're topping it off. If we can't figure it out, we go to the yellow, which is a universal lifetime antifreeze, yellow in color. Okay. Worst case is we drain it all out, flush it, and put new antifreeze of the correct type in. But George, I think you're going to be fine if you stay with the color that you have. And I don't think you are going to damage the all aluminum radiator that you've installed instead of the aluminum cord radiator with the plastic end caps. But I will say one thing that I learned as a radiator repair guy when I was working at a radiator repair and air conditioning specialty shop. And that is, there's a number of tubes, the thickness or the number of tubes that bring the coolant from the one end of the radiator to the other, meaning the top of the top tank to the bottom tank of the radiator, or side to side. Now, some radiators can be 1 tube thick. Other radiators with more cooling capacity might be 2 tubes thick. And the best would be 3 tubes. So how thick is the radiator core is the question. So when you go to buy a radiator replacement, you might want to say, well, it's getting warmer outside, so I want a thicker radiator, one with more tubes. Okay, and the tubes are those channels that can that allow the coolant to pass through in the radiator from one end of the radiator to the other. So it's 1, 2, or 3 tubes thick. I hope I helped you a little bit in understanding this, but
you did.
It's a problem, George. This is a real problem.
Just another way they complicated it. So, like when it said, in other words, basically they want us all riding around on bicycles while they speed by us in limos, the so-called elites. I'll leave it with this, is that I had a friend who was a doctor, and he was just after World War II. He found himself, he was in the Army, he was in Italy. So I guess Fiat was just coming out with cars there right after the war. I think they might have just started then. And he said he bought one of the cars that were one of the early cars. And he says that, you know what Fiat stands for? Now, I know that I'm sure they've improved since. I hope they did. But back in 1946, he goes, the term was Fiat, F-I-A-T. It meant fix it again, Tony.
Well, I know that. George, I know that because it's true. True. Tony would be
you know what Fiat actually means? It means what? Because I
fabricated.
Say so.
Oh, yeah. I thought it meant fabricated in Italy at Torino. I think that would be the translation for Fiat.
Yeah.
Fabricated.
But it works because Torino. They say it works, not because it actually does.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. But in Italian, that's what Fiat means. And in Latin, that's what Fiat means. It means because I say so. So it works because they say it works, not because it actually does.
Well, you know how Ferrari got started? Ferrari got started because Mr. Ferrari, there was a lot of hardware, German, American, British trucks and Jeeps and everything else laying around in fields in Italy after the war. So what he did is he made a nice living fixing up these military vehicles and selling them to farmers or people who were working in factories, needed trucks. He would sell these military vehicles after he fixed them up, and he made a tidy profit. Well, he happened to decide, well, it's time for me to get a new car. So he bought a Fiat. So he was bringing it back, I don't know how many times during that first year, and finally the guy said to him, the guy from Fiat, the mechanic, said, hey, you think you can build a better car? And, Ferrari looked at him and said, yeah, I do. And the rest is history. He opened Ferrari, and like I said, he started making better cars. On that note, it's nice talking to both of you. Take care, both. Yep.
George,
God bless. Bye-bye.
George, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, Ferrari is a beautiful car. I would... we have one in our garage. We have an antique Ferrari. It's a 1980 Ferrari, and it's the same one that Magnum PI would use in his series. It goes 55 miles an hour, forward only. Why? Because it's stuck in first gear. I have to take the transmission apart, and because it's stuck in first gear. And if anybody happened to see us with this vehicle, they would see the Finelli family pushing it backwards, to get it from one garage bay into the other. And we need the hoses, the gas lines have failed, and you can't buy them.
Oh, dear.
You cannot buy. This thing is the next worst thing to homemade. It really is. The seats have no padding. They have as much padding as a coat of paint. It is uncomfortable. It's loud. It's fun. I mean, it's as much fun as a go-kart, but it's not a. It's a race car.
Practical car.
It really is a race car with a beautiful body on it. It's extraordinary to look at. But if I had to depend on it to get me to Springfield and back, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it because it's not reliable. And when it starts up, there's no car I've ever started that once you turn the key and the engine fires up,
attention.
Well, it goes 3,000 RPM instantly.
Yeah.
I mean, what car starts up and idles at 3,000 RPM until it decides that, okay, it's now warm enough to reduce the idle to, let's say, 850 RPM. What engine does that? Only Ferrari that I know of. Now, Mercedes, the new ones, I shouldn't say new because I don't know about a new one, but I can say the 2000 models and around there, you start them up and they have a real high idle until the engine settles down after maybe 30 seconds, and then it comes down to a normal idle. But the Ferrari is at half engine speed, 3,000 RPM, the second you start it up. It's crazy. So now I didn't buy the Ferrari because I was more stupid than usual. I bought it because I thought that it would appreciate in value, and with any money in the bank, I was going nowhere. So I thought that we'd be better off, and we didn't pay very much for it. You know, believe it or not, you could buy you could back then, you could buy a Ferrari for $20,000. That may sound like a lot of money, but it's certainly better.
For a Ferrari.
Right. So they're worth. Was it a good idea? Yeah, it was. But in order for us to sell it, I'd have to get it out of first gear. But anyway.
And you can't buy gearboxes for them.
No.
You can't just go on eBay and search for a Ferrari gearbox.
No, and if I have to, I had to buy a lathe in order to make parts.
What about the Ferrari dealership? Can they help?
Where would they be? where is one?
I don't know, Miami.
Oh, yeah, there's probably one in Miami. Yeah, so 1,000 miles, a little more. We'll just put it on. We'll just
drive 1,000 miles at 50 miles an hour. Okay.
Well, actually, we'd have to put it on we'd put it on a trailer, and we'd have to put it on a trailer, and to get it on the trailer, these things are so low that we would have to fabricate some kind of a ramp so that it wouldn't seesaw on the bottom. And the bottom of the Ferrari is fiberglass. It's a metal.
Oh my gosh!
It's a metal body, but the bottom pan is fiberglass. And we have a leak in one of the rubber hoses that runs from the engine to the heater core in the front, and it's in this fiberglass well, and it's riveted in place. So this, just to change the heater hose on this Ferrari, I would guess would be a $2,000 job. If we weren't going to do it ourselves.
Wow.
It's unaffordable. It's a great toy. It's a great midlife crisis machine. If you have your own tow truck with a flatbed, to get you home, it's great for that. But I don't recommend anybody buying a Ferrari. It's crazy. It's even worse than a new car. Can you imagine that? Worse than a new car.
Yeah.
But Fiat does stand for Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino. So fabricated in Italy at Torino. Yep. So Guineith, you had something that you wanted to talk about. You sent me an email. A little disconcerting.
It kind of ties in with what you're saying, because I don't like making thus says the Lord statements, because if you haven't really heard from God and you think you have, and you end up making an idiot out of yourself, and you end up bringing the name of God into disrepute. But in my prayer time a couple of days ago, I heard something so clearly, not audibly, for anyone out there, but just in the voice of your heart. Anyone who's a praying person knows when the Spirit of God speaks to your heart about something.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. So, class, if you'd like to subscribe to Guineith Isaacs' newsletter, Gentleman of Fortune, you can go to usaprepares.com, click on page 1, or go to the instructors tab, and you'll find the link. I get it. I subscribe to it. So does Rich Sheaben. Guineith, please continue about what you were saying.
Okay. Now, I've got to kind of preface something here. I do actually have friends who have family members in the Victoria Police, and I have friends who actually help to train the Victoria Police. Okay, so this information comes from a source which will remain unnamed, but is close to the Victoria Police. This is what they have been told. Okay, we are having an election in 3 weeks. May the 14th, federal election. Okay, and what my information is from my source, which is close to the Victoria Police, it doesn't matter who wins the federal election. Every country town, I was told in Victoria, but because it's from the federal, time marker, I would say that it's probably going to happen nationwide. But the information that I have relates to Victoria, which is the state where I live. It's going to, every country town is going to be flooded with Islamic immigrants after the federal elections in 3 weeks. And after that time, there's going to be chaos here. And within a year, things are going to be really, really awful in every country town in this state, at least. And I would say, by extension, I don't have any information about any other state, but because it's using the federal election as a time marker, I can deduce that it's going to happen in every other state as well. Okay? And if you want to know what it's going to look like in the end, look at France, look at England. Except in England, it hasn't gone so far yet as to the country towns. It's just in the big cities at the moment. They haven't pushed the immigrants out into little country towns. And I think that when they go to do that they're going to get a very unfriendly reception there. But in Victoria, they're planning to do that fairly soon. And within a year, this state is going to become a hellhole in every major city. And the only places that are going to be livable are going to be places which, in Australia, we would say out the back of Whoop Whoop, which is kind of behind the boondocks. And I'm sure that everybody knows where that is. You'll be all right if you're in the middle of nowhere. And that was the bit the Holy Spirit was speaking to me about. And he said, you need to tell everybody through every means available, get out of town now, okay? As soon as you possibly can. You need to find that little piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, and you need to start living there. At that time, the blue team is going to be thoroughly occupied with patrolling the towns. They are not going to have the manpower to continue patrolling the country roads at that time. And it's just how it's going to be. The Muslims are going to try and push into the countryside, but they're not going to succeed because your average Aussie farmer owns a firearm, at least one. And, not all of the firearms that are out there got registered when the registration people decided to make their laws a number of years ago. And that's just how it is in country Australia, okay? And, it's just a fact of life that the Aussie farmer is a very, very tough breed of fellow. If you think of Crocodile Dundee, maybe that's on a bit of the extreme spectrum, but, you know,
Hold that thought.
It's sort of...
Hold that thought. Guineith Isaacs is with us, class, and she's talking about the Islamists and what is happening in Australia. She mentioned that the blue team is going to be tied up with their duties in the cities, and that if you want to survive, get out to the countryside. But I don't think it just applies to Australia. I think it applies to the United States as well. Would you agree, Guineith?
I would absolutely agree. This is something that I'm getting specifically for Australia, but this is going to be happening everywhere. No matter where on the earth that you live, you need to get out of town, and you need to get out of town now, okay? And that even includes down to, if you're living in a country town with just a few hundred people in it, you need to get out of that country town and you need to move out into either some wilderness area, or you need to, buying some land, I'm talking about, in some wilderness area and setting up a bit of an estate there. Or you need, if you have a bit more money, then you need to get some ranching country, okay? But most places, this is amazing. You can actually still buy land, even if you have just $5,000 or $10,000. If you go and look online, and yes, it will be in the middle of nowhere. Yes, it will be the most pathetic land you've ever seen. But it'll be somewhere where you can put, I don't know, a tent, a shipping container, a camper trailer. You can set up a catchment. You can put a garden in, and you can get left alone. And you can do the whole thing if you're careful for a budget of between $10,000 and $20,000. And it won't be much of a life, but you'll be alive, and you'll be out of the eye of things. Okay, and you should have done it years ago. I know that there's somebody listening who is really taking notice now. You should have done this years ago, and you didn't. And the Holy Spirit was speaking to you years ago, and you didn't do it because you thought that it was all going to be okay. Well, guess what? It's not all going to be okay. It's all coming down. It's all coming down now in the next 12 months. And this is your final warning. Get out of town. Get out of the cities. Go out and buy that little tiny piece of land. You only need an acre or two even. Just that little patch of dirt is what you need. And you need to learn how to live in that landscape. Okay? And it's going to take years. It takes years and years to learn how to live in a particular piece of landscape, okay, to watch the cycles of the seasons go by. And I know that because I live in a semi-arid landscape in a eucalyptus forest that's hundreds and hundreds of years old. And the eucalyptus trees will be here hundreds of years after I'm long gone. But there's a certain way of living in this landscape that, it takes a while to get to know. And any piece of land is like that. And you might find that you're in an area with high rainfall. That's going to have its own problems. You're going to have to worry about getting dry wood to keep warm. Okay, you're not going to have the problem of having to watch out for water. You're going to have the opposite problem. You're going to have the problem of keeping the damp out of things and learning how to stay dry and learning how to maintain a dry firewood supply, especially if you're not only in a wet climate but also in a cold one, because a dose of hypothermia will do you in real quick, especially in the wintertime. It'll do you in within a day. In the wintertime. You have to learn how to live in landscape, and you have to learn that now, and it's better late than never. But most cities here, or practically every city and country town here in Victoria, within a year is going to become practically unlivable. And don't look to the churches for help, because the churches have all been bought and paid for, all of them. They have been told to stand down and accept these new immigrants. Even if the elders are unhappy about it, they're getting their orders from higher up. And they have been promised a bad time if they kick against the goads. They have been promised that the people that they think rule them will give them a bad time. They've been promised that, okay? And they are capitulating. They think that they'll get left alone if they say nothing, okay? They're looking at the church burnings happening all over the world, and they are really, really frightened, all of the elders in all of these congregations. But they haven't seen, they don't realize that the church is not a building. The church is people who love Jesus Christ. That's the church. The church isn't a building. The church isn't a denomination. The church is something that is immortal because it's the hearts and souls of men and women who love God. And if they go, sometimes God tells people to flee from places. There's no shame in it, and normally it's because those places are doomed. And many years ago in Geraldton in Western Australia, the Holy Spirit told me to flee the place. He said, this place is doomed. You need to flee it, and you need to flee it now. And I did. And I packed my sons and my dog and I in some of our belongings into a camper van, and we drove literally from one side of Australia to the other. And we ended up in Victoria. And if you look how far Geraldton is from, Victoria on a map, it's a long way. And we drove there in a 20 or 30-year-old camper van, a 1975 Nissan E20 camper van, which is, which was interesting. And by the time it got to Victoria, it was having mechanical problems. But we got here. And you know what, Vincent? Since we left Geraldton, I sold my house in Geraldton in the end of 2012 for $150,000. And I recently heard that house is now worth between $30,000 and $40,000. Real estate prices there have tanked. You've got an outbreak of syphilis among the adolescents of Geraldton because the child molesters who were stalking my sons in Geraldton had syphilis, and they were molesting 2 and 3 children a day and giving them all doses of syphilis. They would catch children, they would rape them, and then they would release them back into the community. And all those children were all the same age, around about, as my 2 sons, who are both now adolescents. One of them's 16 and one of them's 18. So there's this cohort of young people in Geraldton who are all now adolescents, where a high proportion of them have syphilis. And, somebody told me that, and I said, well, that dooms a town. And they said, oh, how's that? And I said, well, think about it. These children, they all had syphilis. Nobody did anything. Nobody even, the kids were probably even too frightened to tell their parents. The parents, if they went to get help from the police, they were ignored. If they went to the hospital, well, some of them got treated. I don't know about the rest of them. But there would be a good proportion of those children that never got the appropriate medical treatment for their syphilis within the first 12 months. And after the first 12 months, syphilis gets into the bones and it gets into the brain and the central nervous system, and it goes systemic. And you can't treat it after that happens. And it will kill you as sure as eggs. And it will take about 10 years to do so. And in the meantime, it will drive you absolutely crazy. And you will be completely irrational. And all of this happened, this was happening 6 years ago. So you've got this whole cohort of adolescents who are now becoming sexually active in Geraldton that are 6 years into the progress of a disease that will for sure kill them within 10 to 15 years. And they're all becoming sexually active because they're adolescents, and that's what our culture tells adolescents to go out and do. That dooms a town. That dooms a city, because they're going to go to the younger teens, and, as they become older teens, they're going to go to the younger teens, and they're going to keep the thing going. You know what I mean, Vincent? Does that make sense?
Yes, even Al Capone. Even Al Capone died of syphilis. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I wanted to make a comment on something you said about you buying that farm, even though the land is not really nice. Well, that's exactly what we did. We bought a neglected farm here in Missouri. It was in really rough shape. It had been neglected for, in my opinion, at least 20 years. There's no home site. There was no home on the farm, just some falling down barns, and that was it. And that's exactly what we wanted. We did not want to buy someone else's mistake. So we worked on it, and it's a lot nicer than it was. But it took 14 years of living and learning, which is exactly what you said. But in our case, I'm not so sure I want to be here anymore. So we're looking for the next place to land with the Finelli family.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that if you are not seeing what's in front of your own eyes, if you're not seeing the demolition and the destruction of the United States of America and other places like Australia, you're not awake. And if you plan on living in the city, you've lost your mind, in my opinion. Yep. You've lost your mind. Because there's an assumption that electricity will be there. There's an assumption that water will be there. There's an assumption that sanitation will be there. Garbage will be taken away out of your sight, and that everybody's going to be nice, and the traffic lights are going to continue to work. And if you don't feel like cooking, you can go to the restaurant. But that all changes with one EMP. And the water, it's got fluoride in it. It's got chlorine in it. It's toxic. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and if you'd like to subscribe to a newsletter, you can go to usapreparedness.com, and on page 1 there'll be a way that you can subscribe. Guineith, we're falling down. Institutions that we thought were great, we're finding out that are not so great. The perverted Scouts of America, also known as the Boy Scouts of America. I've learned that NBC New York had an article that there were 7,819 suspected perpetrators, sexual perverts, within the Boy Scouts, and the victim is over 12,000 victims of these perverts. And I've talked to our boys who were Scouts, and they said, "Oh yeah, it's like a place where these predators go to prey on young people." The Boy Scouts of America.
That's right.
And what are we talking about?
The Holy Spirit warned me about that years ago, because I had people saying to me when my boys were younger, "Oh, you should get them involved in the Scouts or something, Boys Brigade or something like that." And I said, "Nah, I don't think so." And they said, "Oh, well, why not?" And I said, "Well, I don't trust them." Basically.
Uh-huh.
And the Holy Spirit
good for you. Good for you.
Basically talking to me and saying that's pedophile central.
That's exactly what my boy said. That's exactly what our boy said.
And I was in the Girls Brigade when I was younger, and it was a pretty good experience for me. I learned a lot of useful things. But would I put my boys into Boys Brigade or Scouts or anything like that? No, it's pedophile central these days.
Mrs. Finelli was a Girl Scout leader. Yeah. that she volunteered, and I can assure you there was nothing that was not above board in Mrs. Finelli's troop. That is absolutely for sure. And we've been led to trust people who are just untrustworthy. We've been led to believe that the police are on our side. We've been led to believe that the public training camp is going to educate our children for their betterment. We've been led to believe that the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the churches are, on our side. Not necessarily
They're
true.
not.
And
The churches, I've got the name of a disease that has infected the churches. Okay. I call it Romans 13-itis. And if you want to go to Romans 13 and read the first 7 verses of Romans 13, it talks about how people should submit to the government. But they always stop at verse 7. They never go on to verse 8 through to verse 14. Verse 8 through to verse 14 of Romans 7 talks about that the government only has legitimate leadership as long as it works in the heart of Jesus Christ, which is a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And I don't see the government really loving us. I think the government sees us as being their prey and what they feed on.
No question.
That's
and you mentioned the churches.
Yeah.
In the corrupt Commonwealth of Virginia, we learned when we moved there that we were invited to join all these churches because we were the new fish in the village, the new potential prey, if you will. Well, what we learned from one of the longstanding members of one of these churches is that there were some women, wives, who had these problems, marital problems. And they would seek advice and counsel from their preacher. And there was a cure for this. There was a cure.
Oh, dear.
And the preacher would have these women lie down. Yeah. That's what he would do.
Oh, dear.
And he would fix the problem. And if I were one of these husbands, I would return the favor with a baseball bat or something like a baseball bat.
Yeah, it's like
if you're thinking
they're
that
all conned. The church is not on your side. God is on your side. Jesus is on your side. The organisation down the road in the building of the spire is going to sell you out.
Yeah, I believe that's true in many cases. Gwyneth, thanks so much for being with us. Class will be back tomorrow.